In JavaScript, we can create classes. You can think of classes like blueprints, which will allow you to have different objects with the same structure. The idea of the class is that in it you can define functions and data which then objects created from the class can use. This allows you to have different objects which are guaranteed to have the same structure. Let's see an example of a class. I will say here class rectangle. This class is going to represent a rectangle, and something that we can define in a class is a constructor. I will say constructor, and in a constructor we can define the initial values of the object that you are creating from this class. For example, a rectangle should have height and width. So I am putting those here in the constructor. Basically, the constructor is a function that will be run once the object is instantiated from this class. So I will say this dot height equal to height and this dot width equal to width. What is this? What did I just do? With this syntax, this dot height, I am saying that height is going to be a property of the class and also width, which means that once I instantiate an object from this class, I will be able to access the height and width properties. Let's see an example of this. In order to instantiate an object from a class, we have to do the following. I have to say something like const rectangle1 equal to new rectangle, and as you can see here, in order to instantiate an object from a class, we use new and then the name of the class. And in here, in these parentheses, we have to pass the parameters of the constructor. So I will say something like 7 and 2, for example. And now I can say console log rectangle1 dot. And as you can see, we have height and width. For example, let me say height. And I can console log that. Let me open the terminal, new terminal. And I will say node classes, enter. And as you can see, we have 7. What would happen if I delete this? Let me just comment this out. Let me save, and now let's come here, and let me press enter, and as you can see we have undefined. Why is this? Well, because since we are not doing this dot height, then it means that we are not declaring height as a property of the class, and therefore we cannot access it through the object that we instantiated from the class. So let me put this back as it was, and let's continue. As I said before, besides defining data, I am defining data here as properties. We can also define functionality for our classes. For example, let's say that I want to have a function here which is going to be called area, and this area function is going to allow me to calculate the area of this rectangle. So let me say console log the area of the rectangle is, and I will say here string interpolation, and I will say this dot height times this dot width. And now I can go to the rectangle1 object and say rectangle1 dot area. And let me comment this out, and let's just focus on this one, and I will come back here, node classes, enter, and as you can see we have the area of the rectangle is 14. Now if I clone this line and say rectangle2 and say for example 5 and 3, I can do the exact same. I don't have to define the area function for this rectangle 2. No, I can just use the area function that we define in the blueprint in the class. So I can say here rectangle2.area, and I can just say node classes, and as you can see we have the exact same functionality but with different values, which means that one of the advantages of using classes is to be able to reuse code. As you can see, we are reusing the same functionality in rectangle 1 and rectangle 2. Though I am able to override the area function at the level of an object. For example, rectangle 2 is an object, right? So I will say here rectangle2.area equals to, and I will define a function here. So what I am doing is that I am overriding the area function, but only for this rectangle, not for this one, only for this one. I can say, for example, console log new implementation, and I can save, and I can come back here. I can delete all of this just to have more space, and let's say node classes, and as you can see we have this area which was invoked, which prints the value, the area of the rectangle if 14, and then we have this other rectangle here, and we are overriding the area function, and that is why we have here new implementation, which is this message that we have here. Speaking of reusing code, we can create a new class based on this class that we have here. Let's say that I want to reuse this area function in a square class. Let's do that. Let's say here class square, and I can extend the rectangle class. If you have used other object-oriented languages, extends is basically inheritance here. So I can say constructor, and you know that a square has the same length for all of its sides. So I can say here side, and then I can say super side. What am I doing here? Super means that I am accessing my base class. This is the derived class, and this is the base class. The square class is derived from the rectangle class. And so when I say super, I am accessing the rectangle class from the square class. And here I am invoking the constructor of the rectangle class so that I can pass the height and the width of the square, which of course is of the same length. So now I can do the following. I can save, and I can come back down here, and I can say const square 1 equal to new square, and I can pass only one value, let's say 5, and now I can say square 1 dot area. As you can see, I can use area in my square. Let me comment this out so that we don't have too many things on the console. And now let's say node classes, enter, and as you can see we have the area of the rectangle is 25. Now of course it says rectangle, but we know that a square is a kind of rectangle, which is great. So as you can see, we were able to use the area function of the base class from an instance of the derived class.